Imagine walking along one of the most beautiful trails in the world. To your left, the vast blue expanse of the Atlantic Ocean stretches toward the horizon. To your right, the rugged, ancient slopes of a mountain that has stood for millions of years rise up to meet a clear South African sky. This is Table Mountain National Park, a place of peace, reflection, and natural wonder. But in early 2018, this paradise became a hunting ground. A shadow began to haunt the fynbos and the winding paths of the Silvermine Nature Reserve. This wasn't a predator of the animal kingdom, but something far more calculated and cruel. A man was watching from the brush, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at those who came to the mountain to find solace. This is the story of Bveni, a man who would eventually be known to the world by a chilling moniker, the Table Mountain Killer. He was a man who crossed borders in search of a life, but instead brought a wave of terror to the Cape Peninsula that would change the sense of security for hikers and cyclists forever. To understand the impact of Bveni's crimes, we first have to look at the setting. Table Mountain isn't just a landmark, it's the heart of Cape Town. Thousands of people flock to its trails every week. It's supposed to be a safe haven, but as 2018 began, that sense of safety began to erode. Reports started trickling in of a lone man, often described as athletic and calm, approaching people on the trails. He didn't look like a typical mugger. He looked like someone who belonged on the mountain, but his intentions were lethal. He wasn't just there to take phones and wallets. He was there with a level of violence that seemed entirely disproportionate to the petty items he was stealing. The first few incidents were brushes with death that left the community on edge, but the escalation was rapid and terrifying.
Let's talk about the first major victim that brought this horror into the public eye.
Doug Naughton was a 57-year-old pilot, a man who loved the outdoors and knew the trails well. In January 2018, he was hiking with his wife, Julia, in the Silvermine area. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that makes you feel glad to be alive. They were near Echo Valley when the atmosphere suddenly shifted. Out of the greenery stepped a man armed with a knife. There was no demand for money at first, just an immediate, violent confrontation. Doug, being a protective husband, tried to shield his wife. He stood between the attacker and Julia, giving her the chance to run for help. It was a final act of heroism. The attacker stabbed Doug repeatedly with clinical precision. By the time help arrived, Doug was gone. The shockwaves from this murder hit Cape Town like a physical blow. A man had been killed in broad daylight on a popular trail. The predator was no longer a ghost story. He was a reality. The investigation began immediately, but the mountain is vast, and the killer was elusive. He knew the terrain. He knew how to blend into the shadows and how to navigate the rocky outcrops. While the police were ramping up patrols, another tragedy was already in motion. Just weeks after the attack on the Naughtons, another name would be added to the grim tally. Ian McPherson was an avid cyclist, a 68-year-old man who found joy in the physical challenge of riding the mountain's rugged paths. In March 2018, Ian was out on his bike near the Sun Valley area, close to the edge of the park. He was intercepted by the same man. This time the weapon was different, but the result was just as devastating. Ian was stabbed, and his bicycle was stolen. His body was found later, discarded like the items the killer sought to profit from. Two men, both respected members of their communities, both lovers of the mountain, were dead. The city was in a state of panic. But these weren't the only victims. There were others who lived to tell the tale, and their stories are perhaps even more chilling because they provide a glimpse into the killer's cold demeanor. Take the case of a hiker who was attacked with a screwdriver. Imagine the sheer brutality of being stabbed 9 times with a tool meant for construction. This victim didn't just experience a robbery. The level of force used by the attacker suggested a deep-seated malice. He wasn't just looking for a quick score. He seemed to enjoy the dominance he held over his victims. In another instance, a cyclist was beaten and robbed, left bleeding on the trail, as his attacker calmly walked away with his mountain bike. The consistency in the descriptions began to paint a picture of a single individual, a Zimbabwean national who had entered the country under a cloud of mystery. As the pressure mounted, the South African Police Service and the Table Mountain National Park Rangers intensified their efforts. They used technology, tracker dogs, and community intelligence. The breakthrough came when a man fitting the description was spotted. Bveni was eventually apprehended, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But who was this man? Where did he come from? And how did he end up becoming the most feared person in the Western Cape? During his trial, some of these details began to emerge, though Bveni himself remained a master of redirection and denial. He was 33 years old at the time of his arrest. He had come to South Africa from Zimbabwe, a journey many take in search of better economic opportunities. However, Bveni's journey was marked by illegality from the start. In a stunning admission during his court proceedings, Bveni detailed how he had entered South Africa. He didn't come through a formal process. He revealed that he had bribed his way across the border twice. He spoke about using a fake passport, claiming that he had been in the country illegally to support his family back home. He had worked odd jobs, including construction, but when the work dried up, he turned to a much darker trade. He claimed he was merely a buyer and seller of goods, a middleman trying to make ends meet for his wife and mother in Zimbabwe. But the evidence told a much different story. It wasn't just a matter of survival, it was a matter of systematic predation. The trial of Bveni was a marathon of legal battles and emotional testimony. It took place in the Western Cape High Court, a building that has seen its fair share of horror, but this case was different. The public gallery was often filled with the families of the victims and members of the hiking community, all seeking justice for the peace that had been stolen from them. Bveni, for his part, maintained a stance of total innocence regarding the murders and assaults. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense was simple and bold. Everyone was lying. He claimed that the witnesses who identified him were mistaken or coached. He even went as far as to suggest that the police had framed him. One of the most powerful moments in the trial was the testimony of the survivors. Imagine having to look at the man who stabbed you, who tried to take your life, and speak clearly to a judge. The victim, who had been stabbed 9 times with a screwdriver, gave a harrowing account of the attack. He described the coldness in Bveni's eyes, the lack of hesitation, and the absolute vulnerability of being on a mountain trail with no one to call for help. The DNA evidence was also a hammer blow to Bveni's defense. Forensic experts linked him to the scenes through biological markers and the stolen items that were found in his possession or tracked back to him. The mountain bike belonging to Ian McPherson, for instance, was a crucial piece of evidence. It wasn't just a random bike. It was a high-end piece of equipment that Bveni had tried to liquidate. The prosecution, led by skilled legal minds, painted a picture of a calculated killer. They argued that Bveni wasn't a desperate man driven to crime by poverty, but a serial offender who used the geography of Table Mountain to his advantage. He knew the escape routes. He knew where the trail cameras were and where they weren't. He was a predator who understood time and space, choosing victims who were isolated and unsuspecting. The judge, Judith Cloete, took all of this in over many months. She listened to the technical experts, the grieving widows, and the defiant accused. It became clear as the trial progressed that Bveni's web of lies was unraveling. His claims of being a simple trader fell apart when confronted with the violent reality of the forensic evidence. In December 2020, the verdict was finally delivered. The courtroom was silent as Judge Cloete read her findings. Bveni was found guilty of the murders of Doug Naughton and Ian McPherson. He was also convicted of several counts of robbery with aggravating circumstances, attempted murder, and assault. The judge didn't hold back in her assessment of his character. She described him as cold-hearted and a danger to society. She noted that he showed absolutely no remorse for his actions, maintaining his innocence even in the face of overwhelming proof. The relief in the courtroom was palpable, but the sense of loss for the families remained. Justice was being served, but it wouldn't bring Doug or Ian back. The sentencing phase in January 2021 was the final chapter in this legal saga. The prosecution pushed for the maximum possible penalties, and the court agreed. Blessing Bveni was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison for the murders. But it didn't stop there. For the litany of other crimes he had committed against the people of Cape Town, he was given an additional 33 years. These sentences were to run concurrently, ensuring that Bveni would likely never walk free again. The message sent by the court was clear. The sanctity of the mountain and the safety of its citizens were paramount, and those who violated them would face the full extent of the law. The case of Blessing Bveni raised many questions about security in South Africa's national parks.
It forced a conversation about how to protect such a massive and open area.
Table Mountain covers over 20,000 hectares, making it incredibly difficult to police every inch. Following the attacks, there were calls for more SAM Parks rangers, better drone surveillance, and more frequent police patrols on the trails. The community also stepped up, forming volunteer groups like Table Mountain Watch to monitor the trails and keep hikers informed of potential dangers. The tragedy of the Bveni crimes served as a wake-up call that even in the most beautiful places, vigilance is necessary. But beyond the security aspect, there was a deeper, more painful conversation about the nature of crime and migration. Bveni's status as a Zimbabwean national who entered the country illegally became a focal point for some. However, many were quick to point out that Bveni's actions were the actions of an individual, not a reflection of an entire population. His crimes were acts of singular cruelty. The fact that he was able to slip through the borders twice highlighted the vulnerabilities in the immigration system, a point Bveni himself seemed almost proud of during his testimony. He spoke of the bribes and the fake documents with a level of matter-of-factness that was unsettling. It showed a man who had no respect for the laws of the land he had chosen to enter. The impact of these crimes on the victims' families is something that cannot be measured in years or sentences. For Julia Naughton, the mountain will forever be the place where she lost her husband. Her bravery in testifying and her resilience in the face of such a traumatic event inspired many. The same can be said for the McPherson family. Ian was a man who lived his life with energy and passion, and to have that snuffed out for a bicycle is a tragedy of immense proportions. The survivors, too, carry the scars, both physical and psychological. Each time they see a mountain or hear a rustle in the bushes, the memory of that early 2018 terror likely flickers back. Blessing Bveni's story is a dark chapter in the history of Cape Town. It's a story of a predator who hid in plain sight, using one of the world's most iconic landmarks as his killing field. It's a story of a legal system that, while slow, eventually brought a violent man to account. And it's a story of a community that refused to be cowed by fear. Today, people still hike Table Mountain. They still cycle the paths of Silvermine. But there is a different energy now, a collective awareness that wasn't as sharp before. People hike in groups, they carry tracking devices, they look out for one another. When we look back at the case of the Table Mountain killer, we are reminded of the fragility of our peace. We are reminded that justice is often a hard-fought battle. Bveni's life sentences mean that the trails are safer today than they were in 2018, but the memory of those he hurt remains. His name has become synonymous with a period of darkness in the mother city, a reminder of the man who turned a mountain of beauty into a mountain of fear. As the sun sets over the 12 apostles and the shadows lengthen across the Cape Flats, the story of Blessing Bveni serves as a somber testament to the lives lost and the enduring spirit of a city that sought justice and found it. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of meticulous evidence. They didn't just rely on the sightings. They used cell phone tracking data to place Bveni in the vicinity of the crimes at the exact times they occurred. In the modern age, even a mountain doesn't offer complete anonymity if you're carrying a mobile device. Bveni had been using some of the stolen phones, a mistake that many criminals make. He thought he could simply swap out a SIM card and go about his business, but the digital footprints were permanent. These digital breadcrumbs led investigators straight to his doorstep. When the police raided his residence, they found more than just a suspect. They found a hoard of items that didn't belong to him, items that carried the stories of his victims. One of the most chilling aspects of the trial was Bveni's demeanor. Throughout the proceedings, he often appeared detached, sometimes even bored. He would occasionally smirk when witnesses struggled with their emotions. This lack of empathy was a key point for the prosecution.
They argued that Bveni possessed a sociopathic level of indifference towards human suffering.
To him, the people on the mountain were just obstacles between him and the items he wanted to steal.
Whether it was a high-end mountain bike or a simple cell phone, the value of the object was apparently worth more to him than a human life. This perspective was something the judge found particularly revolting. The legal defense for Bveni had a difficult task. His lawyer tried to argue that the identification parades were flawed. They suggested that because Bveni was a foreigner, he stood out and was unfairly targeted by witnesses who were already traumatized. However, the sheer number of people who identified him, combined with the physical evidence, made this a hard sell. One by one, survivors took the stand and pointed him out. "This is him," they said. "This is the man who held the knife. This is the man who wouldn't stop stabbing." In the face of such consistent testimony, the defense's arguments began to ring hollow. The sentencing of Bveni also sparked a wider debate about the death penalty in South Africa, which was abolished in the 1990s. In the wake of such brutal and senseless killings, some voices in the community called for the ultimate punishment. However, the South African legal system is built on the foundation of the right to life, even for those who show no regard for it. The life sentence is handed down with the strongest possible alternative, ensuring that Bveni would be removed from society for the remainder of his natural life. For many, this was the only way to ensure that the mountain could truly be reclaimed by the people. It's also worth noting the role of the media in this case. Local news outlets like Times Live, the Daily Maverick, and the Cape Argus kept the public informed every step of the way. They provided a platform for the families to share their stories and ensured that the investigation remained a priority. Without this public pressure, it's possible the search for the killer wouldn't have been as relentless. The media helped transform Bveni from a local thief into a national villain, making it impossible for him to disappear into the shadows of the city. The legacy of the Table Mountain Killer is one of vigilance. If you visit Cape Town today and head up to Silvermine, you'll see signs warning people to hike in groups.